Audio lang po.
Unless.
Good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, this lunchtime for the Department of Theories and the Parola Parola Gallery's Brown Bag series. This is already our fourth. Yay! So na-sustain ng Department of Theory tong project natin na every third Wednesday of the month ay may brown bag series tayo. So ang speaker natin ngayong lunchtime ay si Mr. Yuji de Torres. He is the newest, one of the newest lecturers at the Department of Theory. As a background, if si Yuji earned his MA in Critical and Curatorial Studies of Contemporary Art at the National Taipei University of Education in Taiwan, where he was recipient of the Outstanding Student Scholarship. His undergraduate BFA degree is in Information Design from the Ateneo de Manila University. So I'll let Yuji talk about what yung topic niya, no? Hindi ko na ipapre. So I'll turn over the mic to Yuji.
Thank you, Ma'am May, for that intro, and to Parola to hosting the brown bag. So for today, I'll be talking about my practice. First, from like post BFA kind of practice, and then towards more ongoing research now. So the title of this brown bag is thinking through exhibitions from nomadic curatorial practice to exhibition history, since parang my through line in my practice in like thinking about exhibitions in particular and how it's a mode of display, and the way it's defined by After All Research Center is that exhibitions is when art becomes public, so that kind of interaction between showing art and displaying art. So first is I'm borrowing from Judy Freya-Sibayan, borrowing from 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤, and kind of thinking about her own curatorial practice and the idea of a beginning and intentions, and how an idea of a beginning is something that's thought about at a later time or clarified at a later time, as we'll see later on. This kind of like uh, motivation to think about exhibitions. And when I was doing my undergrad, I entered that Green Papaya Art Projects, which was at Scout Rallios in the Scout area back then in 2016 until 2020 after the pandemic. And what interested me in participating or volunteering at interning at Green Papaya is that these spaces that aren't necessarily thought of as spaces for talking about art or culture, that's normally designated into museums or universities, they also happen outside. Like, for example, for Green Papaya, at this point, it was mostly in Norberto Roldan's house, and there are similar artist-run spaces and projects such as like Lost Frames. Like they show video art works in like some people's house, like in Poklang's house and something like that. So this kind of interest in looking for different spaces in presenting arts and culture and thinking about that in a general sense. So in 2018, I co-founded the Nomadic Curatorial Initiative named Kiat Kiat Projects. And before we started, we kind of wanted to build a manifesto, kind of like, when you're young, you kind of want to have a statement to the world and your own practice. So we were inspired by this era of like late modernist, early contemporary art in the West and in Japan. For example, the fluxus around New York and Germany, and London, but also because they've published a manifesto, and also the Gutai group in Japan, where they also published their own manifesto, kind of like thinking about art in this new post-war sense, in that kind of like new modes of display and new modes of distribution of art. For example, like in Fluxus, they also add their own mail art, and for Gutai Group, they also had their own outdoor exhibitions. That's very important in their practice and kind of questioning these ideas, particularly with Gutai Group because of the history of Japan during World War II. So in 2018, we posted our manifesto. It's very short, 2 points. So the Kiat Kiat Projects is focused on non-white cube exhibitions and decentralized exhibitions. So uh, personally, I co-founded it with Ariana Mercado, who's another curator now based in London. But for me personally, I was more interested in I don't know, in when you were young, I think you're more interested in like the loos and guitar and all these like rhizomatic, bending all these infrastructure of centers and all these things. So we're kind of reacting to that. That's why the second point is decentralization, and non-white cube is also kind of building upon practices that aren't necessarily concerned with the white cube space, which is the gallery space, because it's all white walls. It's separated from society, quote unquote. And yeah, and I mean, stemming back from the beginnings in artistron, sorry, iba-iba. So beginnings in artistron spaces, yun nga, parang talking about art and culture, not necessarily in this clinical setting. At least that's the attitude in 2018. So you can still access it. It's on a Google Doc. This is the URL bit.ly Kiat Kiat Manifesto, and it's 2 points. But then we were also playing with the idea of footnotes, this kind of marginal practice. So we had a lot of footnotes. So it's not necessarily like it's 2 points, but then there's so many like annotated things that aren't necessarily organized in a very specific way. So it's mostly like a whiteboard kind of throwing around ideas and references. For example, like this, referencing Anton Vidocle from eFlux, Duchamp, Fluxus, and Judy Freya-Sibayan, who I think figures a lot in both of our practices in curating. So for our first show, entitled Spin Cycle, me and Ariana, we had the phase of visiting or like digging through the Roberto Chabet archive on the Asia Art Archive website, and there's a lot of Roberto Chabet was the director of the CCP Museum for 1 year until he left, and then from 1971 to 2002, he was a professor in the College of Fine Arts. So, and yeah, you find so many things in his archive. For example, like the early conceptual art practices or early exhibitions in the CCP, but also like thesis presentations for the College of Fine Arts. So for this one, we found an exhibition that doesn't really have a lot of texts about it. So it's the folder in the Asia Art Archive is exhibition in Magallanes Village, and then the description is there was an Australian artist visiting Manila, and so they just made an exhibition in a house in Magallanes to kind of accommodate the artist. So on the left is a documentation of that exhibition. So it's in the house, and Jerry Tan had a video work that was on the TV. So we're kind of like thinking about this exhibition, and the exhibition was in 2008. So it's like 20 years after that, and Ariana, she lived in Magallanes village, and she had her family had friends who were selling a house there that was almost empty. Like the family was moving out because they're selling it, and then we talked to them if we could use the house as an exhibition space. So so that's the site of the first exhibition of Kiat Kiat Projects, which is titled Spin Cycle. That's the poster, and that's the address. It's bought by someone now, so you can't go there anymore. So this is the list of artists and our our main prompt, I guess, our main curatorial prompt, other than the Magallanes exhibition, is the word recreation, because it doubles as recreating something, but also recreation as a form of relaxation. And of course, it's in a house, so it's also kind of thinking about ideas of domesticity and kind of relaxing, chillaxing, recreation. So this is some photos of the install. So an installation crochet work by Catherine Nunez. And sadly, she wasn't available for the exhibition opening. It was only one night, so it had to be taken down as soon as it was finished. And Jerome Soriano made use of the backyard of the house with it's like he was recreating this chemistry experiment of like burning something, and then it forms like a kind of this foam of ash. Yeah. And then another installation work, another documentation of some other work. So Neo Maestro um, had some texts with ghost stories on them, and so in one of the rooms he made it more dim, and he brought his own lights to kind of like set the atmosphere of reading these art world ghost stories. And then Leslie Ann Cao had a video work. She also brought her own TV to kind of to show the video. Some other installations. So Itos Ledesma was there with the sound installation, and for the exhibition text or exhibition notes, we made use of different dictionaries and their own definitions of recreation, because that's like the prompt that we had, recreation. So we made use of um, other texts kind of defining that idea, and then the insert is like talking about the exhibition that we found on Asia Art Archive. So that's our first project, and since it's a nomadic curatorial initiative, we wanted to explore a different space, and this one is the cyberspace or email. So we were first inspired by the OG Onel de Guzman. The story is that he was a student in STI Makati, and he had this thesis na parang he was warning everyone that like, oh, you can exploit this membership thing, but then his thesis advisors didn't believe in him, so he released a virus that was one of the first viruses in the through email. And so it was propagated by sending this fake text file called it's a love you virus. So the text file is love letter for you, and to us it kind of speaks to an idea of vulnerability in two ways. So vulnerability, like one is vulnerable systems of computers and this general infrastructure that we've built around it. Vulnerability because you have to be very vulnerable to think that someone sent you a love letter, and you're like, oh, someone sent me a love letter. So you opened it, and now it's like spreading around the world. So that's one inspiration. Second inspiration is the founding of 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐢𝐴, which is a art journal, and it started as a newsletter, an email newsletter, and they were kind of using email as to distribute certain cultural practice that's not necessarily in a white cube. So I met one of the founders when I was in Taiwan, and then he was telling me that there was this art project in Cairo, Egypt, that was a bus, and of course, like it can't be documented anywhere. Like, it's hard to distribute that anywhere else because it's a bus in Cairo. So through eFlux, it had more circulation in the art world. So, but a third, because like I only wanted to do photos, but the third inspiration is Art Review publishes Power 100 every year. And in that list, the Power 100, it's like 100 people most influential in the art world. And a lot of them are balding white men. So the title is How to Prevent Hair Loss, to kind of like, one, signify the kind of borrowing from the vulnerability of Love Letter for You. So if it's How to Prevent Hair Loss, maybe these art review people would open it. So these are the artists that we invited, and to receive the email exhibition, we had a Google form sign up sheet, so you can put your email there um, and receive the exhibition. So this is the what the exhibition looked like on email. So it starts with Alfred Marasigan's texts and some more hyperlinks with Cologne and June Akasha Orlina and also Lockheed Udo. So yeah, some of the links don't work anymore because it relies on the internet. So the internet kind of like a lot of links expire fast. So these are some of the these are some of the links, I guess. So Judy Frey Sibayan gave us a Dropbox link that opens to a love letter, and with Cologne, he made a website that doesn't work anymore. But when you open the website, he asks some artists to make collages for him. So when you open the website, it automatically downloads collages into your computer, into your downloads folder. So again, with thinking about, is it seen here? No, but thinking about vulnerabilities and also in a larger sense, like a Trojan horse certain type of idea. So, and for our third project, again moving to a different type of space, it's called Pizza Party. And again, we were inspired by another entry in the Roberto Chabet archive called 101 Artists. It was at Shop 6 at Sining Kamalig in 1974. And the premise is that Chabet asked 101 artists to bring their own works. So in a sense, there would be 101 works. And one of the key works that was there was Lemon Cake by Judy Frey Sibayan. She says that it's her first artwork or her first entry to the art world because it was her birthday. People gave her lemon cake, and then they were like, "Oh, there's a thing happening in Shop 6." So they drove there, and then they put the lemon cake on top of someone's car, and then whenever people asked like, "Oh, what's this for? Is it for something something?" and then they would just say lemon cake. They're all instructed to just say lemon cake. So yeah, that's the initial inspiration for Pizza Party, and which is like a more of an open call type of exhibition, bring your own works. And because it's a pizza party, we asked people to bring their own pizzas, and it was at Shakey's Katipunan at Loyola Heights. So we rented out their event space that's usually used for birthdays and other events. And I mean, if you rent it, I think you can do anything with it as long as you're not being rude to the other customers, being a nuisance. So yeah, we asked people to bring your pizza. So that's the curatorial prompt, I guess. For example, in Spin Cycle was recreation for this one. It's pizza. So we had an editable Google Doc file where people can put their own names if they want to submit. And we also had an attendance sheet during the pizza party where people would write their names and yes, no if they brought their own pizzas. So these are some of the works. Mark Salvatos made placemats. Abby Watokabe brought a painting, and then we moved a painting from Shakey's, and we put it down, hung Abby's work instead. And some of the works were more table based, I guess. So see some works by Poklong, the broken mirror. It started as a circular mirror, and then it was like shattered during the pizza party. And another work, I think it's the grass one by 𝐟𝐫𝐴Z𝐷, and then a work by Gel Encarnacion, and she had this flip notebook, and each page has something on it. So much like a pizza, you take one piece, like a slice or a page in this case. And another work by Judy Freya-Sibayan, she instructed us to print this Jasper Johns work and put it somewhere in the exhibition. And when you rent out that event space at Shakey's, a mascot also comes. So at the end, we had the group photo with the mascot. And yeah. And so for our fourth project, so wait, maybe I should put years. So this one, first Spin Cycle 2018, Hair Loss, and Pizza Party 2019. So our fourth project was 2 years later in 2021. And we were thinking about, so it's during COVID time. So we were thinking, but this was a brewing idea that we had in thinking about tools and toolkits. And I was talking to Ariana regarding this presentation. I was asking what's the initial idea for it. And she said that our initial idea was kind of making an exhibition in a toolkit, kind of like a mail art kind of vibe, with the toolkit as a space for exhibition. But we expanded it further with other through a website to kind of like it because it's a website and not necessarily a space, you can have different scales or different things that you can exhibit that's not inhibited by mounting it somewhere else, or moving artworks in general is very time consuming and resource intensive. And we also, because it's a website, we were able to invite other practitioners from other parts of the world, like Hari Isra Muhammad is from Makassar, Indonesia, Pangrok Sulap from Borneo, Malaysia, Kong Pham, who is Vietnamese but living in London, and Izzy is Ariana's roommate. So through that, we kind of were able to make use of different comparative toolkits or comparative tools in that sense. So this is some of the works that were there. So with Donna Miranda, she gave us photos of her chair, work desk, and kitchen counter. And it's interesting for Donna Miranda's practice, and she was a artist, choreographer, and cultural worker, art activist. So she has as a choreographer, she has a certain sense of space. And with chair, work desk, and kitchen counter, she's thinking about how she moves within her own house and how it enables her own practice. And for Pangrok Sulap, since they're a printmaking collective, they submitted legs in the bottom left. Because it's a printmaking collective, they would collectively step on the wood block to print on the material. Yeah. And so, yeah, so those are our current four projects that we have. But as I was kind of exploring this idea of exhibitions and how to make use of different spaces, there's also a certain different encounters with different, I don't know, different modes of talking about things, I guess. I mean, that's a prelude to talking about my encounter with After All Research Center's Making Art Global, the third Havana Biennial. So After All Research Center is based in London through Central St. Martin's, and they publish um, this collection of books entitled or concerned with exhibition histories. So this is the first book that they had for exhibition histories. So the third Havana Biennial, and the counterpart to it was Magistrat de la Terre in Paris, and this kind of a moment in history in 1989. So, and through their publication, I was kind of like inspired in thinking about exhibitions more, particularly with the third Havana Biennial, since so imagine in 1989, the Berlin Wall. It's the same year the Berlin Wall came down. It's the same year of the Tiananmen Square incident. So you kind of have these anxieties of moving on or not moving, or like these anxieties, these post or late Cold War anxieties that people had, especially for Havana or Cuba, since they're one of the remaining socialist countries in the world. So for the third Havana Biennial, they kind of wanted to question the idea of a biennial by only inviting third world artists. And the in the introduction in the catalog, the organizer was talking about how they or how much effort they had to do when it comes to collecting different books, publications, or artists around the world, particularly in the third world, since there's not a lot of infrastructure for arts and culture. Same like ours. This kind of like I'm trying to connect these countries without a lot of resources, and kind of building conversation through that. So I was inspired to dig more through an idea of exhibition because like for example the Kiat Kiat project, it's more of like an impulse or desire to kind of examine exhibition spaces, but not necessarily confront an idea of what is an exhibition and the kind of genealogy or potentialities of the exhibitionary form, and kind of thinking more through that. For example, like the Tony Bennett and the birth of the museum, and how it came from the Cabinet of Curiosities in the 19th century. So the museum started as like just basically collections of anthropologists or these explorers, that what they collected around the world, and kind of putting them next to each other in their own private collections. So in a way, we can think about museums or exhibitions in a more cosmopolitan way, but also connected to colonial metropoles in the way that resources or artifacts are taken from different areas and part of the world, and then recontextualized with another piece of these things. And another starting point in thinking about exhibitions is the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. It was held at the Crystal Palace, and it's the first World Exposition, I think. So it brought a lot of it's kind of a show of power of the British Empire, and kind of like accumulating these types of like exotic materials and exotic things. So yeah, thinking about the history of museums and exhibitions in general, and maybe more locally, there was a text by Patrick Flores published by CIMAM. I don't know what it means, but CIMAM. Yeah. Mm, yeah. Yun, what Mamaylene said. So in this text, he was referencing Rizal, who was talking about university labs in UST, I think, and the way that these equipment is sealed in a glass or encased in in glass cabinets, and like students weren't allowed to touch it. So there's this kind of like separation between native students versus the friars and their own universities. And another starting point, another kind of local resonance is, I guess, like the cultural projects of the Marcoses and their kind of trajectory with having a certain cosmopolitan attitude when it comes to it. For example, like the Manila Film Center, it was deemed to be the next Cannes, and kind of like inviting all these people from around the world, kind of rebuilding Manila into this cultural hub in Asia, and also the cultural center and the presence of Ronald Reagan, who was then the mayor of California, the governor of California in 1969. So yeah, that's kind of like the initial ideas on thinking about exhibitions in a local way. But then in some texts, Patrick Flores also referenced Piglas, but not necessarily a deep dive into it. More so like a sections in the text. For example, a text about CCP, and then talking at the latter end of that Marcos era with Piglas, but also there was one published in Pananaw 7 called Temerities, where he talked about the 1955 walkout, and in that sense, the thinking about 1986 Piglas as a kind of occupation of the CCP in that sense. So yeah, so my current research is on Piglas and kind of like looking and building that scholarship in that sense, because it's also touted as an important exhibition, but it's hard to Google, it's hard to find things about it. So this is a catalog of Piglas and the table of contents. This is from I just like I emailed CCP if they have a copy of the catalog, and then they sent it. So this is the catalog. It was in 1986, and it opened in April 1986. So February 25, 2 months, 2 to 3 months after the Marcoses. So they kind of like thinking about this idea of what to make use of CCP, or what to use CCP for, or this kind of heavy baggage that CCP has, particularly in post Marcos times. And yeah, so this is some of the spreads on the catalog. So the catalog is laid out, or the catalog is sectioned with some text entries by the organizers, and then it's sectioned with different galleries or different parts of the CCP. For example, this is the main gallery, and it's designed by Alan Rivera, who I think is the same Alan Rivera who's a pioneer in installation art. So why it's skewed is that it's trying to question the rigidity of the previous strict curatorial, what do you call that? Strict curatorial, im, I don't know. There's a strictness in the curatorial value of a CCP before, at least because it's like Luz and Albano who are Albano's pretty loose, but Luz is a more like rigid modernist in that sense. So another section is depicting or showing the picket line. I still don't have a lot of information about this picket line, because I think around that time they were also thinking, because in the CCP before, it also had MOPA and CAMP. MOPA is the Museum of Philippine Art, and CAMP is the Contemporary Art Museum of the Philippines. These museums are now defunct, so I think there was some um, ideas thinking about like should we continue them and should we not, or how to reorganize these cultural spaces that was built under the Marcoses. And these are some of the works that I found within like the catalog and kind of cross-referencing it. So one is by Nato Habulan, another by 𝐓𝐴𝐺𝐻𝐲𝐲. So I saw like there's a constant theme of like militarization or like military guerrilla imagery in it, because again there were some like anxieties on how to think about this post Marcos era when it comes to culture and arts, and what's the role of that basically, and kind of like the the dilemma, I guess, of supporting Aquino around that time, but also the brewing underground movement around that time, and this kind of dynamic that eventually kind of like um, resulted maybe in the Great Rectification in 1992, and these kinds of like anxieties around that time, and that's why like Piglas is interesting to me. And another point of interest is the fact that Piglas also had artists not from Manila. So this one is so Concerned Artists of the Philippines Negros chapter. They sent 7 murals to the CCP, and this is the only remaining one. And the other 6 aren't found. And what Pee or Norberto Roldan shared is like, oh, there were a lot of organizations that were receiving the mural as they came back from CCP, and there was some story that like some of the NPAs used them as their backpack, so it's repurposed in a different sense. But this remaining banner is repurposed by Pee in his work Dialectical Materialism, and it was shown at Sunshower Fukuoka Art Museum, I think. And these are some of what I found in Monday, because I went to the PKL archive the other day, like Monday, kind of like looking through Purita Kahlo's clippings of Purita Kahlo's clippings from newspapers and anything regarding art, and I found this entry kind of talking about Troy Veneracion and how the same work in Piglas was also shown in the 1986 Havana Biennial, along with 8 other Filipino artists. And yeah, I think Lani Maestro was also part of the 1986 Havana Biennial, but she was living in Canada at that point. So and they participated through the Art Association of the Philippines, headed by Purita Kahlo Ledesma. And when I was researching, there were also some similar exhibitions happening around that time. So this is Bagkus Bugkus at the Met. I couldn't find like what the dates are for this exhibition. So it's yeah. Okay. I found it. Okay. Yeah. To share materials. Okay. So yeah, it's described as commemorating the February Revolution. Yeah, and then another exhibition much later on in October was at the Museum of Philippine Art, and it's entitled Artists for Peace. And what's interesting, particularly in this clipping, is that they referred to that exhibition as something less angry, more positive than Piglas. So, I forgot. They told me to always say this. This research is funded by the Southeast of Now Directions in Contemporary and Modern Art in Asia, published by National University Singapore. And they gave me two mentors. One is Lisa Ito, who couldn't be here, and second is 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤 from the NGS. And one of their, I mean, 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤's comment is like thinking more about the reception of Piglas, and it's interesting to kind of see that Piglas was seen as angry and not positive, which makes the which makes the exhibition more interesting in that sense. It's not necessarily like a happy commemoration of 𝐓𝐡𝐫𝐢𝐧, but this certain sense of there's a tension and anger within it. And another contextual exhibition in 1985 that I found was this exhibition by or initiated by 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐳𝐤𝐢 or KMU that invited different artists around the Philippines. So from Davao, Ilagan, Negros, Baguio, and Manila at the Mount Carmel Community Center, but they also invited some members of the Palestine Liberation Organization. So for other people, maybe that's a research interest for some. And what's also interesting is that CCP has also been publishing some stuff about Piglas lately. So the last year's 𝐓𝐡𝐫 anniversary, they published or they posted some excerpts from the catalog, kind of talking about how, particularly for Alice Guillermo, how that exhibition was trying to capture history, and because like running away from history is like, I guess the CCP was seen as like an elitist space before, and then after that, this kind of like reaction against that supposed elitism of the CCP. And this year, they also posted this artwork from Piglas, and and also I guess my interest in this research is also expanded within similar tensions around Southeast Asia, particularly our shared history of like dictatorships or turbulent times or turbulent crisis, for example. Oh no. Before that, so in this research, I'm also interested in the echoes of questioning how exhibitions should be made, or what kind of spaces what kind of or how to treat spaces when thinking about exhibition, or kind of reacting against the supposed elitism of the CCP. For example, in the members of the black artists in Asia were initially from CAP Negros, and they kind of moved away from CAP in '86, and they formed Black Artists in Asia. And in 1990, they launched the Visayas Islands Visual Arts Exhibition and Conference. In this, maybe you can say it's a nomadic exhibition because it moves to different islands or different cities around the Visayas and kind of trying to build infrastructure in that way, but also the residences of Judy Fray-Sabayan, who was the director of camp from '87 to '89, and she in her autobiography that I showed earlier, she was talking about that experience and how there's so much pressure in kind of democratizing CCP, and she eventually quit that job and developed her own practice, and she didn't make any art until 1997, where she launched the scapular gallery Nomad, which is a portable gallery on her shoulders. So some different artists she would commission to make different scapulars, and she would she would wear them every day for 5 years, so from 1997 to 2002. And again, with a regional resonance with our shared histories in Southeast Asia, we can also see the same anxious exhibitions, for example, in 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐳 in Jogja, Indonesia, in 1997, a few months before their first democratic elections, because so the first president of Indonesia was Sukarno from 1949 to 1965. So in 1965, there was a military coup against Sukarno, which installed Suharto. It had some CIA ties, and so they had they had only one president from 1965 to 1998. So in 1987, they would hold their own first democratic election. So the slot in the box is kind of referencing that gesture of voting, and this installation shot in 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐳. And they're more reflective about it, I think. It's 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐳, they have some recent public programs kind of thinking about 1998, or what they call reformasi, which is reformation and reforming the government, and kind of reflecting on that. But also some places in Southeast Asia is the kind of economic liberalization and reform in Vietnam called the Doi Moi, and this kind of introduction of capitalism in Vietnam, what they call now it's called like a post-socialist context. So around that time, there were more. I mean, in the 90s, there were more private-run spaces which aren't necessarily tied to the government or their own Ministry of Culture, such as Salon Natasha in Hanoi, which started as a artist studio by Voodoo Tan, and similarly or not so similarly, in Thailand, they have, because Thailand was one of the Southeast Asian countries that were receiving a lot of like foreign direct investment. So they had an economic boom in the 90s until 1997 with the Asian financial crisis. So artists from Chiang Mai were kind of reacting to the commercialization and this kind of influx of the market in Thailand in particular. So in Chiang Mai, they they started the Chiang Mai social installation, which is using different temples and public spaces as areas of exhibition. So this is kind of questioning ideas of exhibition, the role of exhibitions in these turbulent times that we share. So yeah, done. Thank you. Questions? Provocations?
What inspired or triggered you to do a nomadic exhibition
I think one is that we were young, so we don't have a space. And second is that we want to move away maybe from artist run spaces that are more centered around particular spaces. And so, kind of, in our idea, kind of building upon what we already have in Manila, which is a good an ecosystem of artist run spaces. So, maybe we can push. I mean, that's the thought in 2018. Like maybe we can push that a bit further and engage other spaces. Okay.
Sorry. How has it evolved that you have a mission, right? Can you explore also on that mission? And then how has it evolved from the time that you began and now going forward?
I think we're less edgy in that sense. Like we're less provocative as people. I think that impulse of trying to negate everything through non-white cube decentralized exhibitions that definitely toned down. And I think for my own practice, at least, I want this maybe because it's self-funded. Um, you're kind of shielded away from criticism because it's your money. Like no one's gonna tell you how to spend your own money. But I think now I want to like engage in a more institutional manner, if that makes sense. And yeah.
I have so many questions. But let's try to disperse them so to give chance to others. Well, first of all, Yuji, very impressive research, and thank you for sharing. I guess my first question is, in your research, is there a specific criteria for choosing these? And also, I guess my next question is, whether did you focus on, or is there a distinction, or even a I guess a blurring of definitions between alternative artist spaces or artist-run spaces and critical exhibition platforms. So I'm not sure what is the criteria or if there is a specific criteria in terms of choosing which, I guess in terms of historically, what you want to include in your research.
Oof, tough second question. But with the first one, the criteria was only if you had. Okay, I forgot to say this. So, Piglas, Art of the Crossroads, initially started as a group exhibition at the Pinaglabanan Galleries, and then CCP had an open slot, so it was moved there. And in the CCP, they turned it into an open call exhibition. And the only criteria that they had is that any work that was talking about democracy or the nation, they would accept. So it ended up being 200, 200 artworks that were hung around the CCP. For the second question, I don't know yet. I think it's more of the initial kind of like addressing similar anxieties at that point. I think because I think I also want to focus on like more post Cold War ideas and these artists trying to deal with not necessarily um this kind of uh how to phrase this because there's already been a study of the comparative exhibitions in the 1970s, which I think has a clear line of like progressive movements versus the government. And I think with this kind of projects in the 90s or late 80s, there's more exploring how to engage with these two dialogues more, I think. Yeah.
And I was not able to read the manifesto. But if you can, or I'm not sure if I was not paying attention, but able to mention the gist of the two objectives of Kiat Kiat. Also, where did you get how did you get the aim for the project?
One, it sounds cute. Two, you were thinking about Kiat Kiat. It's a no, a portable fruit. So parang portable exhibitions. But the manifesto, I mean, I talked about how it's like a more of a reaction or like our own interests. Parang it's not necessarily clear. I think it's more of like these are the two things we want to do. One is non-white cube exhibitions. One is decentralized exhibitions, which I think is a harder task than non-white cube. Short and sweet.
I was thinking since we're here in the context university, do you think there's also parang space for exploring our way of, for example, when you look at the thesis undergrad or even MFA thesis here, do they still, you think, I think, still follow the dominant pattern of exhibiting, not too critical? Is there a space you think that should still be explored, especially here?
no.
Some
I just started. Sorry. I'm a new hire.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have a fresh perspective. So we see it as something that, ayan na yan, traditionally, we do it that way. You have, we give you a space, you put up your works there, and then I will critique it as like a gallery goer. We'll walk around the room and, pero di ba yan, you have online projects. You have, yeah, pizza parlors. Di ba? Our words there. Pero here we're still contained. Essentially, it's a white cube mode of showing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's also like, at least for my class, parang yung last topic namin on South Asian art, we were talking about the Little Magazine movement and the Dalit literary movement and how that kind of like coincides. Yun nga, parang because they're Dalits, they had to make their own institutions to the Little Magazine movement. So parang giving students something to chew on kind of like different spaces, maybe. I don't know. Also just started.
Since you mentioned earlier, like answering, like you mentioned shielding away from criticism because like you paid for it on using your own money, etc. I think it's also significant to also mention that it's also probably shielding it from like usual markets or art markets, and even yung parang the actual art production from Kiat Kiat is not necessarily wouldn't necessarily fit or be let's say marketable or like it wouldn't necessarily wouldn't immediately make sense in a white space gallery or like because if you have to exhibit or like place not an exhibit in a pizza parlor, like doing it in a white cube gallery, you would have to convert it into a pizza parlor before actually mounting the exhibit. So it doesn't immediately make sense. So my question is like, would it be possible to do the same, do both at the same time, like shielding and not shielding it from criticism, but also shielding it from the usual art market?
Thank you, Paolo. But then, I think, pwede naman. But I think the shielding away from criticism is a more of like an art psychology kind of question. Na parang, what type, the burning question always is like art criticism in the Philippines. But I think, yun nga, the shielding, it's a good point that you made of like making art that's not necessarily marketable. And I think that's I I also didn't talk a lot about artists in this exhibition, in this presentation, and I think that's maybe why a lot of artists engage with our projects kasi nga it gives them a different space to kind of like, oh, okay, I'll just make a pizza right here, right now. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm coming from the perspective of museums where the audience is very important. Engaging with the audience, the messaging to the audience, and reaching out to the audience. How about for projects such as yours? Where is the audience? Where do you where do you position the audience? This is a museum, but it's a successful exhibit if lots of audiences visited the space or lots of audiences engaged with it. How about in your? Can I get a follow-up? I was wondering, who is your target audience? Or do you have a target?
think when it comes to audience, mostly like artists or cultural workers, not necessarily thinking about a larger audience. I think yun nga, kasi one is like the lack of them, it's self-funded, so parang you can only reach as much as you want. And yeah. And we don't do feedback forms, I think. Yeah. So it's a Magallanes exhibition. Like we had old people from the neighborhood kind of like wandering in, and yeah, mostly that. Not necessarily like intentional in a museum sense.
Very interesting. So, again, from the museum side, it's so different. It's so different. But I also, it's so different at the same time, very interesting. It's very interesting kasi already may isip ng audience, hindi may isip na maraming mapunta, kailangan.
Diba, critically, I mean, putting exhibition in that critical perspective, do exhibitions really require an audience? Kasi exhibitions, when you think about it, becomes a structure of power. Diba? And part of it is drawing people. So in a way, to try to negate that, to be part of that critical approach to ano happened to the exhibition. Why do we need an audience? And why do we base our success?
So there was, Tony Bennett ang sasagot. Yung funding of the museum.
Can I have a follow-up? Yes, but personally, are you concerned about the success yung maraming sa exhibit? And can I be a bit more personal? Do you seek to derive personal fulfillment, whatever that means from your character? Or it doesn't matter?
I think for Kiat Kiat, when it comes to audience, it doesn't really matter. But I think what matters for us is engaging with artists talaga, and like asking them to make, or like giving them prompts that maybe they wouldn't necessarily have in that sense. Parang,
Are you personally fulfilled or it's not your concern?
I think I am. You know. It's yeah.
Kasi valid din naman if that's not your concern.
Yeah, I think we had enough exhibitions na parang engaging nga with artists, which I think is hard when yung white cube space and kind of like giving them a space, even if it's nomadic, to confront something else. Yeah.
Related dun sa mga tanong nila on success. Kung may konsepto ba kayo ng feeling?
Kung walang concept of success, baka meron kayong concept of
Parang wala rin. I think. I mean, we also don't do it. We also don't do it that often. So parang, like, yeah, less chances of failure.
napaka-provoke.
You mentioned earlier that independent curators moving forward edgy. So I'm curious where that comes from. And I imagine it's not coming from the place of Piglas. So maybe said go down. What does that look like? How do you articulate going down and kind of that knee-jerk reaction that maybe a big institution? Does that look like
I think it's also confronting personal responsibilities or careers, parang you're not, I guess, like becoming more aware of the artist ecology in Manila na parang you have your gallery artists, but you also have progressive artists that have a certain sense of responsibility to a movement. Parang you maybe I'm thinking about it more na parang what's our position in this idea of criticality, diba? Kung there's not necessarily a community or audience that we think about, like what do we do? And that's, I think, yun nga, like our projects have toned down a bit more and like not as much at not, I mean, three is a lot. Yeah. I think does that answer your question? Thank you, Sarah.
How do you know that you've become less cringy?
Or at least how do you qualify that?
Yeah, how do you define cringy?
Yeah.
Ah,
And then now you're saying you tone it down.
Yes.
And I would like to think that the toning down isn't necessarily being less critical.
oh,
So is the toning down like is it maturity or is it realizing contradictions? Like, I feel like the edgy comes from this absolute no to institution. So how did you get to kind of that? I get it, like, you were young, but and then like now, what does critical look like without having that edgy that you were describing?
ah, I don't know. Still don't know. I think that's part of the practice of like looking for form and like how to best address these things and kind of seeing yourself. Yeah. I mean, yun nga, parang you read when you're young, you read about institutional critique and like all these things, and trying to apply them in a different context na may different political climate, I guess, looking for a form, I guess.
Question. What do you think incentivizes artists to participate in projects you're pushing forward? What do you suppose is para drive ng mga artists dun sa Kiat Kiat Project or dun sa art?
What kind of artist do you mention?
Mm.
Kasi when we sa commercial, syempre alam natin yung incentive dun is the possibility of being sold, yung artwork of being sold. Pero in your projects or your alternative space, ano yung nag-incentivize sa artist?
I think it also comes from building trust with artists, and it, it doesn't hurt that my friends are artists and you invite them. And I think it's yeah, again, like giving them a space for experimentation, but also for spin cycle and pizza party. We also had free food, so that helps. But yeah, yun nga, parang
So is it more community
oh,
based and
Okay, I also answer kasi I was part of
Yeah.
the independent class. I think the incentive is the platform itself. Because if they don't have it, where are they going to show their work? Because commercial galleries will not accept it. Other museums will not accept it. Publics, the street, mahuli pa sila.
so
The
it's
platform
open
itself.
for all, no biases or
Yeah, say you have a space to execute the work.
I mean, back in the early 2000s. Very early 2000, I actually, I
put up this parang art initiative, very younger artists, it's just below. The thing is, meron kami mga projects wherein literally we invite artists and student artists to hold their works, tapos nagmapako with yung malate kung saan sila pupunta. So, ang prompt namin sa mga artists is talk about ano yung story within that area para din to engage the audience. Kasi meron ka na captured audience. So technically, you have the public and you have the police. Pero kailangan din namin that institution something to us to be recognized. Yung unang kaya namin siya ginawa is yung lahat kami, lalo na ako as a performance artist, noong panahon na yun, wala kang performing in a gallery. So, walang ganong klase. So, most of the trabaho na meron, even pag lahat ng artists na kumuha ko ng art visual artist na as it's literal sa chat, wala talaga rin kukuha sa'yo unless na may link. And very few galleries pa lang noon. So, yung mga ganong klase. So, maganda yung sinasabi na the platform itself, yung mismong bigyan sila ng proyekto, it would come. Tapos yun din yung opportunity for us na magkaroon ng discourse. Pero maliit lang, baka yung what to consider. Nung ginawa namin siya, at alam na namin ng audience namin, alam na namin na yung satisfaction as an artist na makita yung trabaho mo. As ang immediate din, as a performance artist, yun din yung gusto ko ng visual art / performance. Na ang diskurso mas diretso. So yung tao, pag malapit, ano yung trabaho mo, nag-explain ka. So it's a practice of articulation as well. Tapos isa doon sa ginagawa namin, ang kalokohan. Literally, sinusuyod namin lahat ng gallery at lahat ng malapit na institusyon, nag-iwan kami ng invitation sa kanila. Na exhibit mo ay nasa kalsada ng 1 to 1:30 a.m. nasa gitna ng Raha Sulaiman. Tapos 3 o'clock to 3:30 nasa tatawid ka ng Bayhawk. Tapos ganito to ganito, lilipat kami siya. This is nothing, hindi siya bago. Kasi even for your performance, yun naman talaga nangyayari and it's proven ng mga panahon. So baka yun din yung answer sa idea of audience as well. So kumbaga, hindi man natin siya nakikita, pero meron tayong audience. Tapos, because of documentation, magkakaroon kayo ng audience. Kasi, when we're doing it, we were young and stupid. Up until Eileen wrote about it. So, bigla kami, wait, okay, meron palang impact yung ginawa. All along, we thought na we just need representation. And we want, parang, as yung artist, gusto ko namin ma-consider as artist. Parang, along the way, it will happen. So, yun naman yun. Kaya, very good at that.
Wow.
To answer the what is the insult of the purpose, like I think for me, the kind of purpose of the project, the incentive for me was really like the practice in thinking and the exercise in theorizing, which other spaces don't necessarily give you much of. Logistically, with like bureaucracy, liquidation of funds, etc., a battle, and even ideologically in the sense of confronting these questions in a space that gives you that space to think. No one kind of affords that in a gallery where this is your date, this is, you have the ad like 40, 60 or whatever it might be, or this is your deliverable, XYZ, or even as students, right? Like, thinking is still well within a specific curriculum. And particularly for Kiat Kiat, as much as there are prompts, the incentive really is to just think, which is such a freeing thing, not necessarily kulong lang in expression, but just to kind of exercise theorizing art problems is something you can't afford elsewhere, or not easy to afford elsewhere. So I think that's the main incentive, without the pressure of success or failure. While raising the standards of it, obviously, you won't work at there's no success or failure, you just suck at it. It gives you that leg room to just think forward. So I think that's something that's really quite important in artist spaces.
Which brings us to the next question. How do you overcome yung mga keep it sustainable? Kasi most of these independent platforms, of course, very ideal. Incentives will far outweigh galleries and other institutions, but ang lacking dun sa incentive na is commercial gain. Right? nandiyan lahat ng incentives eh. Everything gives you artistic freedom, etc. You can theorize, you can exercise, whatever. Artistic freedom that you want to do. Pero commercial gain is always frowned upon. So I guess that is still the question that we're still facing.
Yeah. I think it helps na it's not, we don't have regular programming, so parang when we save enough money, then we'll do it. But I think it's also like, it's a critique for ourselves na parang walang artist fee, mga ganun, like, how do you at least some token of appreciation na hindi lang space for thinking. Parang mas material.
Institutions should, I mean,
Yeah.
also reward from institutions, they can see the value of spaces.
I think that's also where the university says hindi siya pwede mag-penetrate. Wala siya dun sa institutions. Government, that value dito is freedom of expression. Pwede pa, para sa akin, pwede pa ma-push ng mga artists and the university. Apart from just yung sinasabi mo nga ako kayo na nakapag-stick sa white na presentation. Kasi yun yung setting na yun yung setting yung in-encourage dapat ng museums.
I think we have parang courses and areas of study which are critical to art. This idea of exhibition itself, I think it's lacking. Parang, would you go as far as to, use the word exhibition as a project? Or, I mean, to really eradicate the term exhibition? Or you do still, parang, you still work within that concept of exhibition?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Many things to explore to that, how exhibitions are. You.
We don't have any questions. Thank you, Yuji, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Meron pa rin tayo next. Buwan na ba kayo? April. March, April.
See you in April.
Third Wednesday of